So, we are on now to the reread, and we are rereading Game of Thrones. So we just decided to jump right in, start with the book that kind of got everything going.
Exactly.
So, I mean, this is exciting. We are doing the prologue. Some might think we would just skip the prologue and go right to chapter 1. Prologue is so important.
It's very, yeah.
There's no way you can skip it. Sets up things, it makes connections, right. Sets the stage really for the whole series.
Yeah, and as we ready to begin, we'll just kind of say again, this is meant for people who have read the book, who haven't read the book. Maybe you've seen the show, maybe you haven't seen the show. So we will be referencing both the show and the book. But the prologue is a very important part. It's like the first 5 minutes of episode 1. So.
Yeah. Absolutely, it is, yeah. So our format for this we'll have a recap, a summary, and then we'll break it down into about 3 sections, sometimes 4, depending on the length of the chapter, and then we'll get into some cool connections elsewhere in other readings. So today, no recap. This is the prologue. Our summary: Gared, Will, and Ser Waymar Royce are 8 to 9 days ride north of the Wall. They are tracking a band of raiding Wildlings. Will believes them to be dead, but Ser Waymar Royce wants proof. They argue a bit before discovering the Wildlings. They argue a bit before discovering that the Wildlings are actually well beyond dead. And so let's dive into some of these details here. Our first third, I'll mention all of the thirds here. So our first third is titled "Clearly a Song of Ice and Fire." Our second one is Royce makes a good point. He's intelligent and brave. And our third section is The Others. So let's jump back up here to Clearly a Song of Ice and Fire, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, could not be more clear.
Yeah, I have several notes taken from specific pages and things like that. Although right now I'm on my Kindle, so it doesn't have the page numbers up, unfortunately. Sorry, I apologize about that.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
But there's different versions of the book, so sometimes pages aren't the same. Right. But I do have some kind of interesting points here about this idea of ice and fire. There's little nuggets here when they reference the cold a lot in this chapter.
Right.
Lines like, "But the real enemy is the cold."
Yeah.
And then they start talking about how the cold itself and the idea of winter itself has injured or killed people. They talk about how the Macers have had to shave off parts of their ears and things like that that have been frostbitten. Another line here: "It steals up on you quieter than Will." Speaking of the character,
right?
And at first you shiver and your teeth chatter and you stamp your feet and dream of mulled wine and a nice hot fires. So I just found that line specifically interesting because the theoretical last book that's supposed to come out is a dream for spring.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of like this dream of thing. So right from the prologue, we get it. Now,
when you said that earlier, I was like, oh, God.
Now, I don't think Gared had actually had that written because, as we know, originally I think his plan was to write 3 books rather than 7, but the last book still may have been called that. And at this point, we don't know if that book is actually going to come out. Winds of Winter could be the final book if it even ever comes out.
Right. Yeah.
But we'll see. But it's still, I think, that idea. Some other ones here. Later on that same page, Gared glanced at the lordling, the scars around his ear holes flushed red with anger where Maester Aemon had cut the ears away. "We'll see how warm you can dress when the winter comes." So they're talking about, again, the cold, and just the cold is going to get to you regardless of what kind of clothing you're wearing and things like that. But I just think, there we go. There's that first line warning you winter is coming.
Right, and they're kind of... It's personification. So they're personifying this idea of cold being the enemy and cold being able to do things. A cold wind whispering through the trees.
Yeah.
Things like that are really interesting. And they also they make mention of even the sky is turning. So anytime that the weather starts to kind of change, they mention the color, the purple bruise color of the twilight. And then it turned to black, and so things are getting worse.
Right.
So I think it's just always kind of neat how they're listening to the darkness. You know what I mean? Darkness is something that could be heard. Right. And so I think that's just kind of cool. It just brings it. It's the best I don't know. It's to not use personification in this prologue when talking about what we know they're talking about wouldn't make sense. I mean, they are they're the enemy. They're cold. They're the others. And so for them to kind of talk about it in this sort of guise, I guess, makes a lot of sense. So. Yeah, and let's real quick too before we get any further. Let's set up and tell folks where we are. We actually are. We are in the Haunted Forest, so it's a vast forest beyond the wall. It's located beyond the Seven Kingdoms, and basically it's inhabited by free folk, which they refer to in the South refer to them as wildlings.
Right.
So that's important to know. Let's see. It's over near Frostfangs, east. By the sea, the Shivering Sea there, a Bay of Seals. So I kind of wondered where exactly they were beyond the wall.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, this is I believe Ser Royce's first range, right? He's a ranger, and he's because he who mentions where he doesn't want to go back empty-handed,
right?
Like a failure,
right? Yes.
Right. And so I imagine that I can't imagine that they're super far north of the wall, but they're definitely far enough that they couldn't just run back.
Yeah, it says they're 8 to 9 days ride north of the wall. So that was like, okay.
But
they're tracking these wildlings. Yeah.
Right. But they also mention that at certain points in this forest, it's so thick that you pretty much have to get off and walk. Mm-hmm. So it's not like they're just riding on flat ground.
Yeah. So anyways, so that's where we're at. We're in the Haunted Forest, and Matt's made some references to, ice and fire.
There's some other ones, but I'll wait until we get a little bit further.
Okay, gotcha.
That I think are interesting.
One thing that I noticed, and we'll get into it here in just a little bit, is like the singing of songs and old Nan's tales and stuff like that. And I just kind of thought, the singing of songs and the weeping of the wall and stuff, and how it's a song of ice and fire. And the fact that that word was in there was kind of cool, too, to make all this kind of fit together. So we're in the Haunted Forest. Types of trees that are in the Haunted Forest included ironwoods, which is very interesting to Matt and I.
It is very interesting. Yeah. A game, if you haven't played it, I think you can play it on PlayStation 4, I imagine Xbox One, and I know PC, is the Game of Thrones made by the company Telltale. Mm-hmm. They make kind of these choose your own adventure video games. They do have a lot of them. There's like Guardians of the Galaxy one, a Batman one, just a bunch of them, but they have a Game of Thrones one. They're most known for their Walking Dead series. Mm-hmm. And I believe like all 3 chapters of it are out. And I believe the second Game of Thrones chapter is supposed to come out this year.
Really?
Yeah, I believe. We'll find out later this year if it is or not. But it's really good, and it takes place during the second book, A Clash of Kings, and you follow this house called House Forrester, and their arc kind of is similar to the Starks, mm-hmm. I'd say.
Yeah.
I'd say, but no, actually, it takes place during a Storm of Swords.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah, it takes place after the Red Wedding.
The Red Wedding.
That's where it starts. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, it's just a cool, interesting game. But their whole thing is ironwood. These like super old, huge trees. Like think like redwoods, I would say. Like that's kind of these big old trees, and they craft shields out of them, and that's kind of their thing. Is they're the only ones who can work the ironwood.
Right, yeah, they're from their seat is known as Iron Wrath. Right, located at the edge of a large ironwood forest in Westeros. And what's interesting is that these ironwoods, there's a place called North Grove.
Yeah,
and so in the game, you're trying to figure out, like, you've got this dying, wish from Lord Forrester, and you've got to, keep it secret. You've got to find the North Grove. It's real. All these different things, or is it real? I don't know. I haven't finished the game yet. Yeah. So, but I just was wondering when I was reading this, are they near the North Grove?
Yeah, it's somewhere beyond the wall.
Right. And so since I haven't finished the game, those of you who have, Matt is not going to tell me, he's not going to spoil it, might know, but who's in there? Like who operates it? Is it just a stash of ironwood? Like what's going on? So the fact that there was ironwood there's also sentinel and oak trees and weirwood trees in the haunted forest. But I just kind of thought, how close are they?
Exactly.
But with the direction. But when you get beyond the wall, there's really the directions get kind of like
all over the place.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to map out and follow. Really, there's not a lot of reference points, I guess.
Right.
So, alrighty, but yeah. So basically, there's our first sort of segment. We'll keep talking about the Song of Ice and Fire connections as we go through. A point that I wanted to make, moving into the second section here, Royce makes a good point. He's intelligent and brave. And actually, I'll let you read that, Matt, that first part.
Yeah, Ser Waymar Royce notes that the wall was weeping just days ago. These wildlings could not have died from the cold. There was something more to it. He felt they needed to inquire.
And he's right, isn't he? I mean, like, so they kept making the argument, and he, being, I guess, new and wanting to prove himself, he's a little bit of a dick.
Yeah,
I mean, he kind of is. So,
yeah.
But like, it just, I think because he's trying to prove himself, and he knows he's got to keep up this facade because he's, Gared's been there for a while. Will is, an experienced ranger as well, and so, he asked Will. Will's trying to convince him that, hey, we're tracking these wildlings, and they are dead. I am sure. He goes, they laid stiller than, they didn't move at all. He crept up on the one girl that was up in the tree. She's not moving. Everyone is just still. Looked like there had been a fire, which was interesting, another connection to fire, but that it had been put out and extinguished.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, yeah, it makes a lot of sense to go inquire. He says the wall was weeping. Will was talking about how many watches he had on the wall, and that, yeah, you're right. Okay, you're right. It can't be that cold because,
right.
The wall's weeping, as in, glistening and stuff from the temperature, so it's not that cold.
Right.
So I guess I hadn't really, just something that kind of stood out to me, because before I'm just like, what an idiot.
Right.
I used to say, what an idiot. Why would you want, why are you going? Obviously, these guys are afraid and stuff and things, but they don't know what it is.
Exactly.
It needs to be investigated. So,
right. Well, I mean, and Waymar Royce also says some smart things, because is it Will who says, or Gared who says, we'll all make a fire.
Right. Yeah.
And he's like, what are you thinking? Like,
right, yeah.
They had just let the wildlings know where we're at. Like, that's a terrible idea. So it's not like he's an idiot or anything.
Right. And he's not thinking of what, Gared is thinking of, is like, because he says, well, fire could keep off
dire wolves
and bears and things like that. Well, and maybe,
yeah,
some other things. But
but a lot of people, as even you find out, even people who are in the Night's Watch haven't seen others or White Walkers.
No, I mean, I think I was reading somewhere in the wiki that it's been like over 8,000 years since anyone's really, made mention of them or things. Mr. Aemon made mention of like the children, this was in A Song of Ice and Fire, working with members of the Night's Watch. So when he got there, he was sending back, he was looking through the records, and he was like, he believed them to be legitimate.
Right.
And that there was actual dealings with children of the forest, which then is...
Right. And keep in mind, as we saw, so this hasn't been in the books, but we saw it last season in the show when Sam is at Old Town and he is talking to the Maesters about, hey guys, I think White Walkers are coming, and they're like, what are you talking about?
Right. Yeah.
And they're just like brushing it off as if it's like that. Like, yeah, I'm sure. And we see that a lot throughout the series and the chapters. Like people being like, what are you afraid of? Ghouls and ghosts and things like that. So,
well, and it's almost like the others are the thing. So it's like, you could believe in giants, you could believe in children, even though they still call those old Nan's tales and fairy tales and things like that. But those are more believable than the others.
Right.
And making references to the Long Night and stuff, which is crazy to me, because the children and the giants, are rumored to be in the Dawn Age well before maybe the, I don't know.
Right. Well, think about it. And guys, by the way, this is somewhat of a full spoiler podcast. I guess we probably should have.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what we've been saying.
Yeah, probably should have mentioned that. So anyway, again, last season in Game of Thrones, the show, that was the big deal, was when they had the, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the council, right? When everyone Cersei and Daenerys and everybody gets together and they show here, okay, here's a white.
Right.
Here you go. Like now you have proof.
Yeah. Because no one would believe them. Yeah, you have to almost show people.
Right.
And that's what convinces Daenerys. But yeah, we won't. Yep. Yeah, we'll get into more of that later. And Cersei, yeah. Okay, so another thing that I thought was really neat, actually, right here with this part with Ser Waymar Royce, Will is looking at him. So they do eventually. Now we're creeping up towards. They decide, yes, we need to go check this out. And as they get closer, I think he tells Will to take up, to go up a tree and to sort of keep a lookout or what have you, to see what he can see. And they're getting closer, and the cold starts to get very, very cold. Mm-hmm. And actually, let's see if I can figure out where he said that at, because it was almost like he's asking, he says, Will, where are you? Ser Waymar called up. Can you see anything? He was turning in a slow circle, suddenly wary, his sword in hand. He must have felt them. He must have felt them, as Will felt them. There was nothing to see. Answer me. Why is it so cold? Mm-hmm. It was cold. And so that's sort of, so now he's starting to realize, okay, there is something to this. All of a sudden, there's a cold like they haven't felt before. It's something different, maybe not even physically cold, but there's just something amiss, right? Something's wrong. But I thought it was interesting. So right after that, he is facing down these others.
Yeah, right here, a shadow emerged from the dark of the wood. It stood in front of Royce. Tall it was, and gaunt, and hard as old bones, with flesh pale as milk. Its armor seemed to change color as it moved. Here it was white as new-fallen snow, there black as a shadow, everywhere dappled with the deep gray-green of the trees. The patterns ran like moonlight on water with every step it took.
Gee-many.
So that is not certainly a white. That is
no,
certainly a other or a white walker.
Right, and it's they blend in. It's almost like they're camouflaged or whatever. And actually, right before what I was reading, it said in capital letter. It actually says the others made no sound. And so it was really interesting that it capitalizes, others. And I'm like, whoa, like
exactly.
So right there, he that's your indicator that we're talking about others and things. So. But something, Will's up in this tree and he's frozen. I mean, he does not know he's not moving. He's not going to do anything here. And you've got Royce down there with his sword out facing these others, mm-hmm. and they've encircled him. But, he's like, come no further. And, he has his sword out and they don't answer him. They're kind of laughing, I think, a little bit. And Will is almost admiring, Royce here. He says that Ser Waymar met him bravely. Dance with me then. He lifted his sword high over his head, defiant. His hands trembled from the weight of it, or perhaps the cold. Yet in that moment, Will thought he was a boy no longer, but a man of the Night's Watch. And, I mean, it's like, for whatever his end may be here, right? It's just, that was kind of like, for them each to, so you have a lowborn Will and you've got a highborn, Royce, for them to be almost on the same, they're brothers of the Night's Watch.
Right. And
it harkens back to, and again, full spoiler, but, what Jon Snow is trying to convince everyone of later on is that we are the living.
Exactly.
Right. And they are the dead.
Yeah.
And so it's the living versus the dead. It's not, the Lannisters but this is a song of ice and fire.
Right.
And so that's why you have to keep kind of hearkening back to that or whatever. It's a fight for survival for all of, Westeros and the Seven Kingdoms and beyond that,
exactly.
with the Wildlings. So yeah, that's ultimately, guys, the Waymar is killed. Mm-hmm. So, he is killed. But look how quickly, though, things kind of, like how quickly he's turned into a white. Because he is he not? I mean, like mm-hmm. at the end, we noticed that he is. It's his. They describe in detail his garment, his gloves, his cloak, and those different things. And it was, I believe, his. It was just the black gloves or whatever that grab Will here at the end. Right. So Will's scared to death, but so he quickly turns him into a white or whatever. But
exactly.
Also, I love that Ser Waymar Royce, cries out for Robert.
Exactly.
So that was really cool. But But yeah, when the blades are touching this, it
talks about the sound that they make.
Yeah.
And it's not the typical sound of metal hitting metal or even a sword hitting a sword. They said it was like a very high pitched sound, so it was almost this unique, different sound.
Yeah. Right. Yep. Exactly. And eventually, they shatter his sword.
Yeah.
Right. You know, I think what's cool about the book is that he actually has his sword out and he's fighting.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And he's actually going sort of blow. Do you think that was a type of sword? Do you think he had?
Well, they talk about it. They talk about
Okay.
a sword. They mentioned that it was castle forged steel.
Okay.
So I mean, and I believe they said it had jewels on it.
You're right. They did. You're right.
Because when they talk about because somebody said, well, you should take your sword off. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, I'm not dropping my sword.
doing that.
Yeah,
right,
because my sword doesn't hit against like the trees
Right,
and stuff
yeah.
like that. And he's like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
Right. Yeah, that was. I just wondered because he swings it a few times against them and is actually able to. He actually connects a couple times and then it shatters.
Right.
You know what I mean? So.
Well, I mean, we see when people fight them other times, and maybe not White Walkers, but at least whites and stuff like that. That regular swords may not be able to kill them, but I believe certainly. They're certainly good enough to kill whites. Regular swords. You obviously then have to like destroy them with fire and things like that. But
right. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, after they shatter his sword, the Watchers move forward as if some signal had been given. Swords rose and fell, all in a deathly silence. It was cold butchery. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. So this is the part that I missed. I actually read it in the wiki, and I totally missed it. Far beneath him, he heard their voices and laughter sharp as icicles.
Mm-hmm.
They were laughing.
Yeah.
I mean, man, these guys.
Yeah. Well, they talk about in this prologue here. They try to again. This is I'll touch back a little bit about some of the stuff about ice and fire, where they talk about just kind of how powerful these things were and how different they were.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about just the idea of like ice and fire here. The other halter, Will saw it with his eyes, blue deeper than any blue, and bluer than any human eyes, a blue that burned like ice.
Right.
So
yeah.
Like there we go again with that idea of burning and ice being. I think that's something we see in this. It's the idea of ice and fire, as if ice and fire are equals.
Right. Yeah.
And then another thing, it talks about. Then Royce parry came a beat too late. The pale sword bit through the ringmail beneath his arm. The young lord cried out in pain. Blood welled between the rings. It steamed in the cold, and the droplets seemed red as fire where they touched the snow.
Jiminy Christmas.
So yeah, just another thing there. And then at the end, when Royce stood over him as now a white, the pupil burned blue. It saw.
Jiminy Christmas, man. This is great. Yeah, I mean, that's intense. I mean, this where Will actually, I didn't realize this either. He tries to take the sword, the shattered sword, back as proof because he's like, no one's going to believe me.
Yeah.
And it's when he grabs that, then he rises, and then so does Waymar Royce, who's standing over him. And I didn't realize too the sword had shattered, and it was like lodged in his eye and things too. And so that's an image for you right there. It's just, and actually that sets up just, this is a violent series. It's a mature series, by the way. So
absolutely, yeah, yeah. Very mature, especially the first season. So,
right.
So if you watch the show.
Yeah, this is an 18 and over podcast, just so you guys know.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's basically it. He Royce kills Will, and we don't really ever get to hear what Gared is up to. He was staying back with the horses and things. So
yeah, well, we find out what happens to Gared, and
right, we do
in chapter 1, I believe.
We do, yeah. But for right now, he's sending it back.